here. Um, so I wanted to thank you all for coming, and I especially want to thank our panelists for coming. I'm going to ask them to just briefly introduce themselves here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Marion, would you like to start?
Yes, hello, my name is Marion Underwood. I serve as the Dean of the College of Health and Human Sciences. I'm also a professor of psychological sciences trained as a clinical psychologist.
Thanks. Anita, would you like to go next?
Yes, my name is Anita Tuttle, and I'm the Director of IT, and I have been at Purdue for over 20 years now.
Thanks. And Jen?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Jennifer Simpson. I'm a clinical professor in speech language hearing sciences, and I currently serve as associate head.
Thanks. Sandra?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. My name is Sandra Sydnor. I'm an associate professor in the College of Health and Human Sciences with the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. I've been here now for 11 years.
Thank you. I'm Jessica Huber, and I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Health and Human Sciences, and I've been at Purdue for just about 20 years now. And I just want to call out Margot Monteith and Kim Buman, who were really instrumental in putting this panel together and putting this event together. And so I thought we would start today. I'm going to just show, for those of people who didn't see the movie, this picture of the iceberg that they talk about, where in the movie, they talk about kind of what we think about as sexual harassment and harassment of women in the workplace, and then all of the things that lie under the surface that are much more commonly occurring. And so I'm not going to lead this up, but I wanted to share it to start our conversation. And I was hoping that our panelists would tell us a little bit about an experience that you had and what could have helped in that moment, kind of focusing on the iceberg below the surface. And so I thought we could start with Jen Simpson.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and everyone who put so much time putting this together. I think the more subtle things that happen are the exclusion type events that happen, the maybe talking over you, or that you don't have as much time to talk or share your ideas in meetings. I think that commonly happens to women in the workplace, and especially in academia. I think there's more blatant things that happen often, and I can share a recent story if you'd like, Jessica. So this is a very recent story, and it's quite blatant actually that it's sexist, but I was invited to a committee meeting to share my expertise in an area to solve a problem about teaching. And so when I got there, this problem, the chair was talking about how impossible this problem is, and continuing to talk about how impossible it is, and that there's no way we could figure out an answer. And I, raised my hand and said, I'm happy to share my idea if you're ready for it. And this chair literally said, I can't believe it would be a good idea, Jen. And so that was pretty blatant, but it was in front of other people, and other people in the committee all stopped. And someone, even on, I think that person's here actually, said that was a rude comment and not okay. And of course the person tried to backtrack it, but everyone knew exactly what that was meant to say, because that would never be said to a man, just would never be said to a man. But the ending of that story is that my solution was the solution that we moved on with and fixed the teaching problem. So that's an example that's very recent, and I think it happens, I share it because I think those things do happen to women more often than they share, because most of the time we move on of like, well, it happened and I said what I had to say and I moved on. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Sandra, can I ask you to share some, share some experience you might have
Yes,
had?
of course. So I'm an engineering undergrad, and I was on my first job in that capacity, and I was in a department with, so I've always been in departments with all men, and I was the only woman, and I was the youngest person, as it happened to, in the department of around 20 people. And this was with Burger King Corporation, and our headquarters are in Miami, Florida. So there were long siestas on Fridays. And of course, I had no idea that this was the case, being a newly minted undergraduate engineering student. And so, what would happen is all of the men in the department would go out for lunch, and they would be usually escorted by one of our suppliers, because we didn't make anything on premise. So I was in research and development. We were responsible for working with suppliers across the world in order to supply and staff the individual units. So they go out for lunch on Fridays. Back in those days, this was like a 2 martini lunch, and they leave the office around 11:30. And you can imagine, I mean, Miami, Florida, there are a lot of things to do on a Friday afternoon that don't involve work. So they'd leave at 11:30 and usually wouldn't come back for work. And I always, for like 2 months, I wondered where everybody was on a Friday afternoon. And finally, one of the secretarials, not even my own boss, who I held in very high esteem, one of the secretaries took me to the side and said, well, they're going out for lunch because they've got to talk about manufacturing processes and what kind of materials to use. And it's just easier to do that when everybody's together. So this was a woman. So even she, because it was so normalized, just kind of discounted my participation. So I always had to fight, to not be that person with their eyes glazed toward the looking glass and window, looking in, but being on the outside.
Thank you, Sandra, for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anita, would you be willing to share a story from your career?
Yes. So as I stated earlier, I've worked at Purdue for, it's just going over 20 years now. And over the course of the years, just in my professional environment, I've always worked very hard in the respect of everyone around me, faculty, staff, and outside of the college even. And years ago, when I had applied for the director position, I was not my supervisor's preferred candidate. And I knew that. I'd heard from others that they'd even mentioned who he was advocating for. And it was a man who was not qualified, in my opinion, and had very poor work ethic. He was a coworker of mine. Well, there was a search committee given the level of the position, and it consisted of a diverse group of faculty and staff. And as you know, I had built up rapport with a great number of faculty and staff already. The committee actually suggested me. They recommended me for the position. He ultimately went with their choice and chose me for director. However, his respect for me was definitely very clear. He did not respect me at the same level that he had my predecessor. And that being an example, leadership meetings, there'd be times we'd be doing things, presentations for the president or what have you. And my job, rather than sitting around with the rest of the leadership team, was to sit in the front of the room and advance his presentation, his PowerPoint slides, because he didn't really like using the clicker. And it was, like, to me, very demeaning. And I know for a fact that my predecessor, he was never asked to do those type of tasks. And that's just one of many, many experiences I encountered under his leadership. And I can say I'm very grateful, thankful that it's the opposite of that now as far as the leadership is concerned. Thank you, Marion and Chris Laddish have been amazing. So But that was definitely, and there are many other stories. I've been overlooked for promotions, and not in the university, but in the past. So yeah, women just have to fight a lot harder for their jobs.
Thanks, Anita, and thank you for highlighting how this is a pervasive problem. It's not just faculty who deal with this in academia. Marion, would you share something from your career?
Of course. I have been fortunate to escape the tip of the iceberg, the really overt forms of sexism and harassment. But the challenges I face every day are that men in leadership are much more comfortable working with and communicating with each other. And they have a lot of informal conversations that women are not included in, no matter what we try. They pick up the phone and call each other, but do not so much consult with us. And there are exceptions to this. So I'm speaking in broad sweeping terms, but there certainly are exceptions. So there's a sense of being excluded, not being included, and in fact, not being part of conversations that are really important about this college, just because the men prefer to communicate with each other. Another thing that I experience a great deal is choices about resource allocation. So resources are allocated more resources are allocated to men and units that are predominantly male. And when I have gathered the data and showed the data and said, look, this is really a discrepancy, I'm told, oh, that has nothing to do with the fact that, you're a unit of mostly women or that you're a woman. That has nothing to do with that. And with all due respect, when a man says that to me, I think they're not in the position to know what is because I'm a woman and what is because I'm not. So those have been my experiences.
Thank you, Marion. So I'm going to start talking to all of us about some of the parts of the movie. And the first part is when Dr. Burks is talking about her experience with coming to work and her choice to present her real authentic self at work. She talks about code switching, and she talks about the need to code switch to fit in, and then making a conscious choice just not to do those things. So this is for the whole panel, and I'll bring you all up here. When have you felt the need to code switch or just bring part of yourself to work? Or alternatively, when have you made that choice to be authentic and bring your whole self to work, even if you knew that it could impact your career? And if someone would like to start, I'm happy to highlight them. I'm trying to bring all my views back here. Sorry. Is there someone who would like to go first?
So So it's a small example, but it's when I served on the senior staff committee, which consisted of primarily ITAP, the CIO, executive directors, and what have you. For those first few months, I was pretty quiet around the table. I was afraid, really, to kind of, I wanted to be very careful about in which issues I, had an opinion on or had a suggestion on. And when I did start, coming out of my shell a little more relaxed, because it was majority male, men around the table. I was talked over many times, but I will say that one of my peers, whenever he would catch it, he would say, well, that was Anita's idea. But, I did. And every time to the very end, I was not my whole self. I never brought my whole self into any of those meetings. I just didn't really feel that I could. So, which is sad. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Think of the ideas they lose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would someone else like to talk a little bit about this topic of bringing your whole self to work, Sandra?
Yeah, I can share an experience, like Anita, one of many. But I was in a meeting with predominantly, I think there might have been one other female faculty, and ideas were being tossed around the table, and some of them were mine, and it was just really, it's really interesting to observe this from a participant observation perspective. When you see ideas that are being bantered about, and the seed of that idea comes from you, and you're not given credit, and it becomes normalized, right? So you're I was unwilling to always assert the origin of that idea. And so I would just pass it off as saying, well, it really doesn't matter who develops that idea. The bigger picture or is the good, the common good. So we'll all benefit from it. It doesn't have to be mine. But over the years, I disavow that. And so I recall a meeting in the very recent past where that was happening. And I said, hold up, hold on. I think I said that around 10. Does anybody remember me saying that around 10 minutes ago? And so, and I think the more that we do that and the more that we're able to speak up, it A, doesn't become as normalized as it was before. B, it highlights attention and a spotlight on what's happening for others. So you start building your own knowledge about, oh, this doesn't feel right. And why haven't I noticed that in the past? And then, you often, and I don't think I'm fortunate to the exclusion of anyone else, you'll often find an ally when you're able to do that, because speaking your voice gives permission for others to speak theirs as well. So it's scary the first time you jump out there and say, hey, wait a minute, but it becomes easier and easier and easier. And it's really a beautiful thing when you see others around you catching that same vibe and energy and being able to speak up for themselves as well.
Thank you, Sandra. And I think you're making a great point there. Marion?
Just to follow up on Sandra's excellent point, I just applaud you doing that, Sandra. And we can also do it for each other as women. If we're fortunate to be in a room where there's more than one woman, and we hear a woman's idea not discussed and then mentioned later by a man and get a lot of attention, we have an opportunity to say, you know what you just said is exactly what Sandra mentioned 10 minutes ago. What do you think, Sandra, what do you think of his idea? So we can do that with each other if we're fortunate that more than one of us is present. That can be a lot of fun to do. And without saying too much, I'll say there are 5 women deans at Purdue, and we work together in meetings to elevate each other's voices.
Jen?
I think it's pretty obvious coming to work as your authentic self, but if you do have children as a woman, and sometimes there's some pressure or even internal pressure to maybe not speak of them, not make that a problem in your life, not make that be a distraction or an excuse of why something's not getting done. And, a couple examples I can think of, there were times where I had to bring my young children to work if I was going to come to work because of whatever situation I found myself in. And so a solution to that too is when that happens to my colleagues or people in our department, we figure out how to make that work for them so that they can continue to be productive, but care for their children too. So it's a kind of an obvious, your whole self, but I think women struggle with that much more.
It's never obvious, Jen, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Marion?
It can just be such a gift too when a mentor or a supervisor can support you in doing that. So I remember so clearly this moment at UT Dallas when my children were in middle school, in that period between when there's after school care and when there's not. And I had to pick them up every day because I wanted them to do things that mattered to them. And I worked really hard in those years, but I walked out of my office at 3:20. I was in that carpool line, getting them where they needed to go, then working nights and weekends to make up for it. And one day my boss, my beloved boss, longtime boss mentor, stopped by my office about 3:15 and started talking to me about something. And I had to look in the eye and I had to say, Bert, I am really sorry. I have to go. I've got to pick up children. I am really, really sorry. And he gave me the greatest gift. He said, I am so proud of you. Don't worry about it. You will always be so glad that you set up your schedule this way. Don't worry, I'll call you later. No problem. I wish I had done more of that. So to have a supervisor who could hear my concern, say, don't worry about it. I know you're really productive. I'll get with you later. I've never forgotten that. And it meant a lot. And it's a big reason why I stayed at that university for so long, is that I had a male boss, the big boss, who supported my whole self.
And I think I appreciate that, Marion. I think that's so important. And we're getting some questions here, and I think we're getting to some of them. I just wanted to highlight them. Advice about making space for yourself in environments dominated by white men, and encouraging men to do exactly what Marion just described. How do we move forward in these areas? Just wanted to highlight some of those questions. Yeah, Sandra.
There. Marion's example brought a picture perfect example back to me. When I was a grad student at the Ohio State University, I had two young children, and I was teaching this lecture, an entrepreneurship class lecture, in this really old building. And there came a day when I was unable to get them to their sitter's house before I went on campus to teach. So I brought them with me, and I sat them right there in the front. And I wanted to stop by my department chair's office before that happened, but I just didn't have time. So I called him and I said, listen, if you, because he would often come in, because he was an entrepreneur himself. So he'd often come into the class and just listen and see what was going on. And I called him. I said, listen, if you happen to, drop by, I've got Jeffrey and Cassie here. I'm so sorry. I just didn't have any alternative, and I thought this was better to bring them rather than to cancel class. He came to the class. He sat in the front row with Jeffrey and Cassie for a good 10 minutes. And then as he left, made a public display of shaking each one of their hands on his way out. And that, I could have worked for him forever. From that one experience where, I wasn't asking for him to do any of that. And he just, as a consequence of his personality did. So it compensates for increase. It can compensate for pay, it just makes the climate, the work climate, so right and robust, and you feel supported. And that's not an easy thing to find.
Thanks, Sandra. So thinking about this question of finding a space for yourself and how men can help, another thing that comes out of the movie is this idea of the hidden work that women do. Dr. Hopkins, I think that was the most, she brings it out in such a striking way, the number of hours that she spent working on that MIT report. And she talks about the interruptions to her work, the men who used her reagents and her machines, and her lack of resources. And Dr. Birx reminds us of the time she spends every day writing emails and managing interactions. And for me, that really, those hit home. This hidden work hit home. And I was hoping maybe you could talk about that, how you navigate that. If you felt that way, how do we change this kind of belief, speaking to this idea of how do we get advocates involved, and how can we encourage men to help out? Could we think about a little bit about how we stop doing the extra hidden work as women? Or if you have felt that way.
I've definitely felt that way, and have agonized over, am I being too assertive? Am I being too aggressive? If I say, no, that's not okay with me, how will that be received? And I have to say that in my particular case, it's something that I impose on myself more than others do to me. I'm, you know, I'm always worried that if I express an opposing view to my male peers or to my male boss, that I will somehow pay some terrible price for it. But I've learned that when I do take a strong position, of course professionally, of course constructively, actually it works out quite well, and they're quite willing to negotiate with me. So I am in a constant battle of telling myself to try to put aside all the socialization that we get as women, that we need to be nice and agreeable and not push anybody on anything. And I need to act more like the men do, not in all the way, but I need to be as assertive and as good of an advocate for our college as they are, and to realize that it's not going to be devastating, and that the person on the other end will say yes, no, or maybe, but that I'm not doing anything wrong by asking or by saying, no, that is really not acceptable. That's not acceptable to HHS, is the way I tend to say it. If I'm really saying like NO, I'll act like it's the whole college. We are all lining up, all 5,000 of us together, to say that is not acceptable to HHS. So that is something that I need to work on with myself. And I'm not saying I don't blame it on anybody else, but I think that for me, that is largely self-imposed. And when I can move beyond it, it's better. And honestly, being busy helps. I don't have time to ruminate a lot, and I don't want to be impulsive. I don't want to behave brazenly or rudely to other people, but it is a blessing to have so many things before me that I do not ruminate on every single one of them.
Thanks, Marion.
If I could chime in on
Of
that
course.
too, Jessica, to Marion's point, it can be daunting if you overthink it, but if you really are able to prioritize that space that Jen talked about and bringing your authentic self to work, and you're enjoying the work that you're doing, then you can approach a conversation unapologetically. And I think to Marion's point, um, most people in the main will respond to you respecting yourself and boundaries, and speaking up in ways that don't diminish anyone else. It's not a zero sum game, right? So if I need space for, I'll go back to my prior example, Jeffrey and Cassie to accompany me where I am, and I'm doing the work that I was engaged to do, then part of that is incumbent upon me to respect that contract and how I want to be treated and respected. And if I don't ask for it, then that's going to come back on me too, right? So it's this delicate balance of self-talk. We have to do a lot more self-talk and internal work to buttress ourselves to say, okay, you're not asking for a favor.
Thank you, Sandra. And I just want to highlight one of our wonderful female alums has been chatting to me, and she said that she is very cognizant of not saying, I'm sorry, I can't, or unfortunately, I can't. And I know this is language that I have adopted, and I think it's a great reminder. So I just wanted to thank Joyce Miles for sharing that with us. Marion?
I could just add on to Joyce's wonderful comment. Some of the best advice I got, and it might have been almost 20 years ago, from a woman who is an expert on childcare, was that women in academia, when we decline, we should say, I'm not able to do that. No apology, no explanation. I am not able to do that. It's hard to argue with that statement, it sort of implies perhaps there are forces beyond yourself that make you not able to do that, or but whatever, you just say, I am not able to do that. No, I'm sorry. No explanation. So Joyce, I'm right with you. That's great, sound advice for all of us.
We've had a question from that kind of goes along with the question earlier of how do we help men to be involved in this hidden work. And it's a faculty member in the college reminding me that a lot of the extra work that we've been doing, and I feel this is very COVID, it's not just COVID, but it's gotten worse with COVID. The mentoring, the advocating, how do we encourage men to participate in that? How do we engage our allies? And it reminds me of Dr. Willenbring's experience with Dr. Lewis, who was the student who worked with her when she was being abused in Antarctica. And she saw him as an ally. And I guess I didn't see him as an ally, but that can be left to another discussion. But how do we engage those male allies? How do we encourage them to see the work that we do as valuable work for them to do? Any thoughts about that?
I think when we have a chance, we need to be explicit about why we do it and invite them to join us and point out when they don't do it or when they miss an opportunity to do it. I once had a man tell me, you know, I'm always trying to promote the idea that people who are good at getting grants should mentor younger faculty or should offer to read their applications and to help. And I was making that suggestion, and he said, well, I've done that and they don't like my feedback. They never ask me again. And I said, well, why don't you reflect on the type of feedback that you're giving and think about why it would be if you would give the feedback. So, and I think it's important to be explicit. Like if we're wanting to be generous or to work around a woman having a child and let her have some time off so that she can do something more later, you know, we need to like give voice to the idea that people are a long-term investment, and that to give a woman who's having a baby a little time off around the child's birth is great for the long-term investment in her career and her talent. Because if we can keep that woman at this college, it is so worth the short-term loss of her ability to teach a course in a single semester. So I think just talking about why we make the choices we do helps, because I think it sometimes doesn't cross the rest of their minds. We do these things because they're the right thing to do, because we're caring people, but they're actually honestly very often good for the bottom line and good for the organization if we can point that out and help.
Thank you. And Elena Benedicto has wrote in the chat that it's not just men, it's women too, that we have to encourage to be supportive and to consider other points of view. Are there other thoughts about this kind of hidden work and encouraging others to participate in the important work of supporting underrepresented and women faculty and staff and students?
I liken a lot of this work to the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because a lot of it is about diversity, right? In this case, diversity of gender. And so often we find the people that are doing the work are the people that are being most victimized by others not recognizing the work that we do. So maybe one of the ways, I don't have a fix to this, but maybe one of the ways that we can begin approaching a resolution is to hearken to the argument of diversity being such a bottom line, game changing attribute. So that case has been made, right? That diverse organizations have better creativity, they're more innovative, and it translates to the bottom line. So, because we as women bring a diverse perspective, it makes for better science, and it makes for better education, and it makes for better culture. And so ultimately those building blocks make for a better world. So if there are some parallels, I think, that we can bring in to highlight what it is that we bring. And, unfortunately, I think it's also the case that we should go for the low hanging fruit, because educating and trying to convince someone of that is often costly and futile.
Yeah. Other thoughts about making space for yourself and making finding advocates, developing those kinds of relationships, how that has worked in your careers?
I'll speak a little bit. It might be a little bit off topic, but I think Elena's comment is very true, and the part about that we might remember when women are part of this because it hurts more. I think that's so true, and this kind of quote is a lot of places, but something like, when you walk through the door, make sure you hold it open. And I think women can do a better job for each other with that, because sometimes not even, but women too get very focused on their opportunity and trajectory and promotion and that, and can sometimes just not remember that kind of what needs to happen for the people right behind you. They're not that far. You just have to reach out your hand and mentor, offer, or remember that those people should be in the room too. So might be a little bit off topic, Jessica, but.
No, not at all. I saw something this morning on one of my social media feeds, and or was it yesterday? And it said an ally is someone who will mention your name in a room full of opportunities. And I think that's what we have to do for each other. And that's what we need allies to do, right? Yeah. So I kind of wanted to keep moving forward on what we can do. Dr. Clancy told the U.S. House of Representatives Science, Space, and Technology Committee that we need to move from a culture of compliance to a culture of change in our institutions. So a culture of tracking that we aren't having the tip of the iceberg occurring, but really we need to change the whole iceberg. And so I also want to bring up that Dr. Birx reminded us in the movie that correction requires action. So what does that mean to you? What can we do institutionally or personally to bring lasting change to academia? I mean, and really encompassing faculty, staff, and students, because it really is pervasive. And while some of these were older stories that were shared, this is happening today, every single day. Both the tip of the iceberg and the iceberg underneath. Anita, would you like to add something? Oh, I can't hear you. I think last year. Oh, that sounded promising. Now we can hear you, I think. No.
I'll do it this way.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing that we could all do is be sure to report when we see somebody that is being treated unfairly or being, abused, neglected, over is to report it. And I think over the years, I know early on for my career, I probably didn't. I probably saw many things and just turned a blind eye because I didn't want to be the next in line to be abused. So I think the key is to just not be afraid to speak up and to stand up for somebody who is, being taken advantage of or what have you. I mean, that because the bottom line is, I mean, we're all here to the more we pull together as a team, as a group, we build each other up. I mean, that's what it's really all about. It's not so much with my team. I'm very fortunate. I mean, they're all men that work under me currently, but I've had women as well. But it's all just to build them up and to have their voice heard for ideas and to make sure and acknowledge that it was their idea and it was very valuable. And, I think you've all heard me speak very highly of Chris Bentley on his wonderful ideas and his leadership. And but just reporting it and don't be silent is one.
That's great. I just wanted to say, Cassandra has said that it's hard to report when no one listens. And I think that's a good point, that we can always listen and believe when someone tells us. I wanted to re-highlight something that Marion said earlier. So often you tell someone something that happened and they say, oh, that wasn't because you're a woman. They're always a jerk.
Yeah.
Well, that's not very helpful. So being believed, and Kim Buman made a beautiful document for Purdue that we have put on the website that shows all the different ways you can report anonymously or non-anonymously issues related to bias and harassment in the workplace and in your educational environment. Marion, did you have something to add?
I agree with everything that's been said. I think we need to be very mindful of what we are modeling for our peers and for the next generation. So when we fail to speak up, when we are excluded, left out, or when other women are left out, we are by our silence, we're saying that that's acceptable behavior. It is hard to speak up. We just have to take the risk, and we have to do it not just for ourselves, but for the younger women who are watching us. We also have to be mindful that we don't fall into the pattern of wanting to be close to those in power and be aligned only with them, because those are going to be men. So we have to make sure we want to have good relationships with our male coworkers and with our male supervisors, but we want to avoid the trap of being sort of seduced by power and caring more about their opinions and communicating more about them. We need to make sure we are always bringing the right people into the conversation. We need to think in terms of inclusion. What can we do? What lever can we turn at every level to make sure that women are included? Because we are an incredible source of talent, and the world is missing out on a lot if we don't have every opportunity. So we have to try to speak up for ourselves, speak up for our peers, and speak up for the younger group who's watching.
So true. And I also think that we have to not just invite our male colleagues, but to prod them, depending on your relationship, to speak up on our behalf. So when a man sees another man advocating for justice and equity and inclusion and diversity, it makes it that much easier for one of his counterparts to do the same. And, again, turning that eye internally, it just takes that one time to cross over the threshold of standing up for ourselves and for others, for it to become a lot easier, to Anita's point, right? A lot easier to begin doing that and normalizing that kind of behavior.
Thank you. Jen?
On that point, Sandra, I think you're completely right. And I've had experiences before I came to Purdue that were quite horrendous, really. And I talked to one of my male counterparts, the same level I was, years later, and said, it was just terrible back then. Didn't you see it? And he said to me, I didn't think it bothered you. And of course, I was very, I was right out of graduate school, and I didn't let it bother me on the outside, right? I just carried on and kept going. And probably looking back, if I would have been more open with him, maybe, just maybe, he would have been an ally to me and would have helped sort it out. But in the moment, I didn't see it that way. But looking back, actually saying something like, this bothers me, what can I do, might be a good first step. It would have been for me.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jen. Do you have other advice for everyone about, not just Jen, all of you, about forging these relationships, finding allies and champions to advocate on your behalf.
So if they don't come naturally, you know, if it's the case that your network doesn't include men naturally, either as a consequence of your research or sharing teaching perspectives or serving on committees that are designed to increase engagement, then we ought to start being very intentional and strategic about cultivating, again, that low hanging fruit. Men that are woke, men that do see the value proposition, men that know that they, A, came from a woman, were birthed by a woman, have sisters and daughters and wives that they can't possibly turn a blind eye toward. And you know, you kind of get to understand the lay of the land and who those men are. So go for that low hanging fruit first, rather than trying to convince and persuade someone that it's just going to be so much effort when you've got John here who doesn't need that effort at all. All he needs is encouragement. Because, you know, it's also the case that men are walking around on tiptoe, not knowing exactly what to say and how to say it and if it's appropriate. So invite them in. Intentionally cultivate a network that includes men as allies, men as friends.
Thank you, Sandra. I think that's a great message. Other thoughts about this I think being open about what's happening to you is important, and not turning what's happening onto yourself, and saying like, there's something wrong with me that this is happening. That's not what's happening. And makes it a little easier to say that that it's not me, this is systemic, this is a problem, right? So how could our system step up? How can we institutionally change? I mean, Anita highlighted the very critical nature of a diverse search committee, right? That brought us, Anita, and believe me, as an HHS faculty member, I am so grateful to that search committee. But are there other things that we can remind ourselves to do, that diversity isn't just a word, it has to be enacted? One thing that I think we could be doing better is recognizing all of those below the top of the water iceberg things as actual real abuse, that we start labeling what it is. It's emotional abuse. And I think just using the right words for these things can help make it clear how big they are, right? Other ideas? Certainly, I would think that Marion would be advocating for more women leaders, looking how I think having parity helps with having us at the table, right?
Well, and I think, you know, representation really matters too. We have to really look at the signals that we're sending, you know, so often I'll be sent some really nice piece of communications for the college, and it'll have a picture of a man. And we do need to have some pictures of men, but 78% of the students in this college are women, and a lot of our faculty are women, and most of our staff are women. So of course we want to have some pictures of men too, but it can't be a steady diet of that. So just watching the little things. And I remember so clearly, very early in my career, I went to a research conference, and there was a session put on by the National Institutes of Health, by some of their program officers, on how to get your first grant. And I already had my first grant, but I went anyway because I wanted to know how to get my second grant. You know, I wanted to get all the information. And I still remember the slides they showed. And the first slide was step 1, have an idea. And it showed a little figure with a light bulb, and it was clearly a man. And I've never forgotten that. Like, why is that necessary? Why send any signal that only men can have ideas? So we have to watch a lot of the subtle stuff, and we have to speak up about the big things, and we have to do everything in between. We have to look for every lever we can turn to make sure that women get all of the opportunities, and we have to call people on behaviors that interfere with that. So one small example, I have this wonderful former postdoc, very excellent man, young man, outstanding career, great to work with, raised by a strong mother. I mean, this is really a feminist man. And the first time he had to write a letter of recommendation for a student, he wanted to show it to me because he'd never done it before. And he just wanted to make sure he was doing it well. And he had seen lots of my letters, so he knows how I do reference letters. But this was for a female student who we had both worked with. And he made a lot of the letter about how pleasant she was and how good her interpersonal skills were. And I had to go back to him and say, Sam, stop it. This letter needs to be about her intellect, her competence, her professional expertise. Stop it with the personality, stop it with the agreeableness. But it's just, he thought he was writing her a great letter, so we have to look for every way we can guide others to give women every opportunity, and we have to be open and speaking up about it.
Thanks. Other thoughts, Anita or Jen? Sandra?
Yeah, Jen, were you leaning forward to unmute yourself? Okay.
No, oh, sorry, Jen, I didn't see that. Go ahead, Jen, you go first and then I'll get Sandra.
Well, I have a quick story that happened last night, so it's a little non sequitur. But so I went to my daughter's sports banquet last night. She's a senior, and they all give senior speeches, and they're impassioned and some emotion and how much everything meant. And the coach didn't organize who was going to go first or last, but just said, go ahead and speak. And there was 4 young men and 4 young women. And every time the 4 men went first, even when the young women were standing up to go next, they confidently just walked by them and gave their speech. And it was so impactful for me because, of course, I'm meeting you all here today. And it was just so in my face of like, this starts happening so early in these very just small ways of who kind of feels like they have command of the ship and who doesn't. And then after the 4 men, the interesting thing I saw after the 4 men independently, confidently gave their speeches, the 4 women, the young women, looked at each other and for 15 seconds figured out what would be the best order. And I thought that was also striking too, that they worked together to kind of figure out whose speech was going to be the best flow. So I don't have a solution for that, but it was just, you'll see it everywhere once you start thinking more about this, is my point.
I think you're raising a really important point that we need to be thinking about it. We need to be attending to it because it becomes so ingrained, right?
And Jen, what a great example. Like, how perfect to share that, because the more representative we are, so the more of us that there are, the more that we'll be able to, we don't even have to be intentional about thinking about it. We will think about it and we'll share that with others. And the more of us that get promoted, we can share that stream of thinking from the top down and from the bottom up. And the more of us that are retained, it's just remarkable to me how these are some of the same challenges and same ways of curing that we find in DEI. So, we say we need to really create a priority on attracting, hiring, promoting, and retaining diverse faculty, BIPOC faculty. The same thing to the T happens, in my mind, for women. So the more of us that there are, the more unlikely it is that these things will be normalized, and we'll have to have programs like this that say we need to be thinking about it. Thanks for sharing that example.
And Joyce has also written to me to say, as we mentor our students, helping them to do these things as they move into their jobs, whether they're, in academia or outside academia, they're going to take the skills we give them and change the world, right?
Yes.
And I think that's a great thing to remember. We're creating the culture we want. Yeah. Any final thoughts? I want to be respectful, we're really close to time here, from either chatting or from our panelists here.
I just want to say thank you to you and Kim for organizing this, and to everyone for coming and participating. And if you have not had a chance to see the film, please do that. I think it's available on the internet for just a few dollars. And it really is an excellent film. It's very powerful, makes you think. It's a really, really well done work of art.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you all as well. And I really so appreciate our panelists for sharing their experiences in their life and their thoughts with us, and showing us how women are really walking through these things in academia. And if you haven't seen the movie and you'd like to see it, it's on Vimeo, which is a video sharing platform. It's Vimeo, and I think it's about $6.50 to watch it. And if you have a daughter or a wife or a friend who's a woman in academia, it's really like required watching, I think. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to everyone who came and showed that this is something you all care about. That meant a lot to us. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hail Purdue, happy homecoming.